For 6 long months after my husband Richard passed away, my son Nathan and his wife Claire seemed determined to make sure I never felt alone. Every weekend they arrived with bags of groceries, fresh flowers, and warm smiles. They insisted on cooking dinner, fixing things around my house, and reminding me that family should always stand together during difficult times. At first, I appreciated every gesture. Losing Richard after 42 years of marriage had left a silence inside my home that no television or radio could fill. The old house in Maplewood suddenly felt enormous, and every room carried memories of the life we had built together. Nathan's frequent visits gave me something to look forward to, and Claire never missed an opportunity to tell me that I deserved to be surrounded by people who loved me. I believed every word. Looking back now, I realized their kindness came with carefully planted suggestions. Claire often sighed dramatically while looking around my living room. "This house is beautiful, Evelyn," she would say, "but it must be exhausting to maintain all by yourself." Nathan would quickly agree. "Maybe someday you'll think about downsizing, Mom. You don't need all this space anymore." I always smiled and changed the subject. Then Claire began mentioning retirement communities. She talked about peaceful neighborhoods, organized activities, and friendly staff who supposedly treated every resident like family. She even brought colorful brochures one afternoon, insisting she had only picked them up because she happened to pass the office. I never asked for them. Still, I assumed they were only worried about me. Everything changed on a quiet Tuesday evening. After dinner, I told them I was heading upstairs to read before bed. Halfway to the staircase, I remembered I had left my reading glasses on the hallway table outside the guest room. As I walked back, I heard Claire's voice through the slightly open door. "We're almost there," she whispered. Curious, I stopped. Nathan answered in a nervous voice. "What if she changes her mind?" Claire gave a quiet laugh. "She won't. She's lonely, Nathan. Lonely people hold on to anyone who gives them attention." A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Nathan didn't reply. Claire continued, "Once she sells this house and signs the company over to you, we'll move her into the cheapest care facility we can find. There's no reason to waste money on expensive places." I couldn't breathe. The words echoed through my mind. Cheapest care facility, sell the house, sign over the company. I waited for Nathan to object. Instead, he quietly asked, "Do you really think she'll agree?" "Of course," Claire answered confidently. "She's grieving. She trusts us completely." The sentence hurt more than anything else. For months, I had mistaken manipulation for affection. Without another second of hesitation, I pushed the door open. Both of them looked up in shock. Claire nearly dropped the mug she was holding, while Nathan's face instantly lost all its color. Neither of them spoke. "The act is over," I said calmly. Claire forced an uneasy smile. "Evelyn, this isn't what it sounds like." I heard every single word. Nathan stood so quickly that his chair scraped loudly across the wooden floor. "Mom, please, let me explain." I folded my arms. "Explain which part? The plan to sell my home? Taking control of Richard's company? Or sending me somewhere you'll never have to think about me again?" Nathan lowered his eyes. Claire recovered first. "We're only planning for your future." "No," I replied. "You're planning for your future." Silence filled the room. I looked at my son. This was the same little boy who once cried after finding an injured bird in our backyard. Richard had raised him to value honesty, compassion, and responsibility. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had been buried beneath ambition. Claire stepped closer. "You're upset because you're grieving." "I'm grieving," I answered quietly, "but I'm not blind." She crossed her arms. "You're making a terrible mistake." "No," I said. "My mistake was believing your kindness came without conditions." I pointed toward the front door. "You have 10 minutes to collect your things and leave." Nathan stared at me. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." Claire's expression hardened. "After everything we've done for you?" I met her eyes without flinching. "Now I know exactly why you did it." Neither of them argued again. They gathered their belongings in complete silence before walking out the front door. Nathan paused for a moment as though he wanted to say something, but no apology came. He simply followed Claire to their car. When the front door finally closed, I stood alone in the quiet house. For the first time since Richard's funeral, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. As I sat beside the fireplace that night, I realized grief had clouded my judgment. I had confused attention with love and dependence with family. I had no idea that by sunrise I would discover their betrayal had already gone far beyond whispered conversations behind a closed door. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, my mind felt unusually clear. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it had replaced the fog of grief with something sharper: determination. Richard used to tell me that emotions should never make important decisions. Feel everything, he would say, but decide with your head. That morning, I followed his advice. The first call I made was to my longtime real estate agent, Caroline Brooks, who had handled every property transaction our family had made over the past 20 years. She answered cheerfully, "Good morning, Evelyn. I was actually planning to call you." My stomach tightened. "Why?" There was a brief pause. "Nathan contacted me yesterday afternoon. He requested the latest market valuation of your house. He said you'd asked him to begin exploring selling options." I gripped the phone tighter. "I never authorized anything." "I suspected as much," Caroline replied. "Something didn't feel right, so I didn't release any information." "Thank you," I said quietly. "Please place a complete hold on my file. If anyone, including my son, asks about this property, the answer is no. You have my word." After hanging up, I stared through the kitchen window. The betrayal wasn't just an ugly conversation anymore. They had already begun taking steps behind my back. Nathan wasn't waiting for me to make a decision. He was trying to make it for me. Instead of breaking down, I opened the notebook Richard had always kept beside the telephone. For decades, we had written important contacts inside its worn leather cover. Lawyers, accountants, insurance agents, business partners. Every name represented another piece of the life we had built together. I started making calls. By noon, every security code in my home had been changed. Nathan's emergency access to my financial records was revoked. The locks on the side entrance were scheduled for replacement that afternoon. None of it felt like revenge. It felt like repairing a house after discovering termites. You don't hate the insects. You simply stop them from destroying the foundation. Later that afternoon, I drove to Bennett Engineering, the company Richard and I had started from a tiny rented warehouse nearly 30 years earlier. Although I had retired several years ago, I still owned the majority of the business. Nathan had been managing day-to-day operations since Richard's illness. When I walked through the front entrance, several longtime employees greeted me warmly. "It's wonderful to see you again, Mrs. Bennett. We've missed you." Their kindness reminded me why Richard had loved this company so much. It wasn't just a business, it was family. As I approached Richard's former office, I found Nathan sitting behind his father's desk, studying financial reports. His surprise was impossible to hide. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I smiled politely. "Visiting my company." "You should have called first." "I didn't realize majority owners needed appointments." He shifted uncomfortably. "I've been handling everything." "I know." I took the chair across from him. "And today I'd like to review everything." His confident expression disappeared. For the next 3 hours, I sat with our senior accountant, Martin Ellis, examining every contract, invoice, and quarterly report. No money had been stolen. That wasn't the problem. The problem was something far more subtle. Nathan had approved several expensive consulting contracts with a marketing company owned by Claire's cousin. Every invoice was technically legal. Every payment had supporting paperwork, yet the fees were unusually high for the services provided. Thousands of dollars were quietly leaving the company, not through theft, through favoritism. Martin looked uncomfortable. "I assume Nathan had your approval." He didn't. Nathan entered the conference room just as I finished reading another contract. His face grew pale. "Mom?" I closed the folder. "Beginning today, every consulting agreement exceeding $5,000 requires my personal approval." He frowned. You're undermining me. No. I met his eyes steadily. I'm managing the company I helped build. Employees around the conference table remained silent. Nathan looked embarrassed. You don't trust me anymore, I answered honestly. I trusted you completely. The room became painfully quiet. Trust, I continued, isn't something people lose overnight. It disappears one decision at a time. Nathan lowered his head. For a brief moment, I almost saw the frightened little boy he used to be. Almost. But then he straightened his shoulders. You've changed. I nodded slowly. Yes, I have. Because grief had once made me vulnerable, now it had made me stronger. As I left Bennett Engineering that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan and Claire wouldn't accept defeat quietly. People chasing someone else's fortune rarely walk away after their first failure. Something told me they were already planning their next move, and this time I intended to be ready before they made it. 3 days after my visit to Bennett Engineering, Claire appeared unexpectedly at my favorite neighborhood cafe. She spotted me sitting by the window with a cup of tea and a newspaper before I noticed her. Without asking permission, she slid into the chair across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked different. Gone was the polished confidence she usually carried. Her eyes were red, and she wore an expression carefully designed to invite sympathy. Evelyn, she said softly, thank you for agreeing to see me. I didn't, I replied. You simply sat down. She forced a weak smile. I know you're angry. I'm disappointed, I corrected. Claire clasped her hands together. What you overheard that night, it wasn't meant the way it sounded. I calmly stirred my tea. Really? She nodded quickly. We were under tremendous financial pressure. We said things we didn't mean. I looked directly into her eyes. You specifically mentioned moving me into the cheapest nursing facility you could find. Her smile faded. You've taken it out of context. I don't believe I have. She leaned forward. Nathan hasn't been sleeping. He's devastated. I imagine betrayal is difficult for everyone involved. No, she whispered. He's devastated because you've stopped trusting him. I couldn't help noticing she never apologized. Not once. Instead, every sentence focused on what they had lost. Claire reached across the table, attempting to touch my hand. I quietly moved it away. Please, she said. We're family. Family doesn't secretly plan each other's future for personal profit. Her expression hardened for only a second before the tears returned. You've embarrassed Nathan at the company. I corrected poor management. Everyone thinks you don't believe in him. I folded my newspaper. Belief isn't the issue. What is? Character. She stared at me. Nathan deserves to lead Bennett Engineering. He may someday. Her eyes brightened. So you'll step aside? When he earns it. The hope disappeared from her face. You can't expect him to spend years proving himself. I spent 30 years building that company. She frowned. You're being unreasonable. I smiled politely. No, Claire. I'm simply refusing to hand over something your husband hasn't earned. Her patience finally snapped. You don't even understand modern business anymore. Interesting. She crossed her arms. You're an elderly woman living alone in a house that's far too large. You're clinging to a company you barely visit while destroying your own son's future. Several people glanced toward our table. I kept my voice calm. My son's future is entirely his responsibility. He'll never have what he deserves if you keep controlling everything. There it is. She blinked. What? The truth. She looked confused. This conversation was never about my happiness. It was always about your expectations. Claire stood abruptly. You're selfish. I slowly placed enough money on the table to cover my tea. My husband and I worked for every dollar we own. I picked up my purse. If protecting that work makes me selfish, I'll accept the title. Without another word, I walked out of the cafe. That afternoon, I drove directly to the office of Harold Simmons, the attorney who had handled Richard's legal affairs for nearly 25 years. He greeted me with genuine concern. I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances. So am I. Once we settled into his office, I explained everything, from the conversation outside the guest room to the suspicious consulting contracts. Harold listened without interrupting. When I finished, he removed his glasses. You still own controlling interest in Bennett Engineering, he said. Nathan cannot remove you. I don't want a legal battle with my son. You may not have a choice." I sighed. "There has to be another way." "There is." He opened a folder. "You can offer Nathan complete financial independence." I looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" "A fair buyout." He explained that Nathan owned a minority share Richard had gifted him years earlier. If I purchased those shares at full market value, Nathan would receive enough money to start his own business or invest elsewhere. In return, he would no longer have any ownership or influence over Bennett Engineering. It was fair, generous even. More importantly, it would remove every reason for Claire to see me as an obstacle. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Nathan. "Mom, Claire's parents want us all to have dinner tomorrow night. They think we should settle everything peacefully. Please come." I read the message twice. Claire's parents had always been decent people, hard-working, honest. I doubted they knew anything about the plans their daughter had made. I slipped the phone back into my purse. "Harold," I said, "prepare the buyout agreement." He nodded. "I'll have everything ready by tomorrow afternoon." As I left his office, I realized something important. For weeks, I had been defending myself. Now it was time to set the terms. At tomorrow night's dinner, Nathan would have a decision to make. He could build a future through his own hard work, or admit that the only future he wanted was the one his parents had already built for him. The following evening, I arrived at Le Jardin, a quiet French restaurant in downtown Maplewood. It was elegant without being extravagant, the kind of place Richard and I had visited on our wedding anniversaries. Soft piano music floated through the dining room as I spotted the familiar faces waiting near the window. Nathan sat beside Claire, his shoulders tense and his eyes fixed on the table. Across from them were Claire's parents, Walter and Helen, a humble couple who had spent their entire lives running a neighborhood hardware store. They greeted me warmly, completely unaware of the storm that had brought us together. "Evelyn," Helen said, standing to hug me, "it's been far too long." "It's good to see you," I replied sincerely. Walter smiled politely. "We're glad you agreed to come. Families shouldn't let misunderstandings grow." I returned his smile but said nothing. The waiter poured water into our glasses before disappearing with our dinner orders. An uneasy silence settled over the table until Claire finally cleared her throat. "I think we should put everything behind us," she began. "We've all said things we regret." I looked at her calmly. "Have we?" She hesitated. "What happened the other night shouldn't define our family." Before anyone else could speak, I placed a large manila envelope on the center of the table. Nathan frowned. "What's that?" "A proposal." Walter adjusted his glasses. "What kind of proposal?" I slid the envelope toward my son. "Inside is a formal offer to purchase your ownership shares in Bennett Engineering at full market value." Nathan stared at me in disbelief. "You want to buy me out?" "I'm giving you complete independence." The color drained from Claire's face. I continued before anyone interrupted. "The amount reflects every penny your shares are worth. Once signed, you'll have enough capital to begin your own company, invest in another business, or pursue any future you choose." Nathan slowly opened the envelope, flipping through page after page. This is permanent." "Yes." His voice shook. "You're removing me from Dad's company." I gently shook my head. "No, Nathan. I'm giving you the opportunity to build something that belongs entirely to you." Claire suddenly leaned forward. "You can't do this." Walter looked at his daughter in confusion. "Claire?" She ignored him. "That company belongs to Nathan's future." "It belongs," I replied evenly, "to the people who built it." Her composure shattered. "You're keeping everything for yourself because you're bitter." The restaurant grew unusually quiet. Several nearby diners glanced toward our table. Walter's face turned crimson. "Claire!" She barely heard him. "You're an old woman who doesn't even need that company anymore." Walter slammed his hand against the table. "Enough!" The silverware rattled. For the first time that evening, Claire looked startled. "What has gotten into you?" Walter demanded. She opened her mouth but couldn't answer. Walter turned toward me. "Evelyn, I don't understand any of this." I took a slow breath. "I never wanted you and Helen caught in the middle." He frowned. "Then tell us what's happening." I met his eyes. "Several nights ago, I overheard Claire explaining how she planned to convince me to sell my house, transfer my company to Nathan, and move me into the cheapest nursing home she could find." Helen covered her mouth. "No," I nodded quietly. "She believed grief had made me easy to manipulate." Walter slowly turned toward his daughter. Please tell me she misunderstood. Claire remained silent. Nathan lowered his head. Walter's voice trembled. Claire? Still nothing. Finally, Nathan spoke. It's true. The words barely rose above a whisper. I knew about it. Helen's eyes filled with tears. Nathan? He buried his face in his hands. I should have stopped it. His shoulders began to shake. I kept telling myself we were only planning ahead. Claire stared at him in disbelief. What are you doing? Nathan looked up, tears running freely down his face. I'm telling the truth. She grabbed his arm. Stop talking. He pulled away. No. For months he'd defended her. Tonight he couldn't defend himself. I failed Dad, he whispered. I failed Mom. Silence surrounded the table. No one spoke, no one moved. After a long moment, I gently pushed the envelope back toward him. The offer remains open for 30 days. Nathan looked at the paperwork. If I sign, you walk away with enough money to build your own future. And if I don't, you remain an employee under my leadership. Claire stood abruptly. This is unbelievable. Walter slowly rose to his feet. No. He looked directly at his daughter. What's unbelievable is the woman you've become. Tears streamed down Helen's face. We didn't raise you to measure people by their money. Claire looked around the table, searching for support. She found none. I quietly stood, picked up my purse, and placed enough cash on the table to cover my meal. As I prepared to leave, Nathan spoke one final time. Mom. I turned toward him. I'm sorry. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I believed he truly meant those words. But I also knew that apologies, no matter how sincere, could never erase the choices that created them. Real change would have to come through actions, not promises. With that thought, I walked out into the cool evening air, leaving Nathan alone with a decision that would shape the rest of his life. A week passed before I saw Nathan again. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I heard a knock at my front door. When I opened it, my son stood there alone, carrying a single duffel bag. His clothes were wrinkled, dark circles surrounded his eyes, and the confidence he once wore had completely disappeared. Without saying a word, he handed me a folder. I signed the agreement, he said softly. I opened it. Every page of the buyout contract bore his signature. The transfer was complete. Nathan no longer owned any part of Bennett Engineering. I stepped aside. Come in. He walked into the kitchen where I poured 2 cups of coffee. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been on my mind. Where's Claire? He stared into his coffee. She left. I remained silent. The moment she realized, the buyout wouldn't make us wealthy overnight. Everything changed. He gave a tired laugh that carried no joy. The money cleared our debts, but it wasn't enough for the luxury apartment she wanted. He rubbed his forehead. She called me a failure. My heart ached for him. Not because he had lost Claire, because he had finally discovered what her love had truly depended on. I spent months believing that if I kept making her happy, everything else would work out, he admitted. I was wrong. I nodded gently. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we need most. He looked at me. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. He swallowed hard. I only wanted to tell you that you were right. For a long moment, we simply sat together. Then he spoke again. Can I stay here for a little while? The old version of me would have answered immediately. She would have prepared the guest room, cooked his favorite meals, and protected him from every consequence. But that woman no longer existed. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. No, and he looked stunned. You have plenty of room. I do. Then why? Because loving you doesn't mean rescuing you. His eyes filled with disappointment. You need to build your own life. I don't even know where to begin. You begin exactly where every successful person begins. With responsibility. He lowered his head. I understand. I hope you do. I gave him the contact information for a trusted financial advisor and recommended a modest apartment not far from his new job. You have talent, I reminded him. You don't need my company to succeed. For the first time in months, Nathan smiled. It was small, but it was genuine. He stood, picked up his bag, and hugged me tightly before walking toward the front door. I'm going to make Dad proud, he whispered. I believe you will. 6 months later, spring returned to Maplewood. The gardens around my home burst into color, replacing the gray memories of winter with fresh beginnings. Bennett Engineering had never been stronger. Rather than trying to manage every department myself, I promoted our senior engineer, Lucas Harper, to managing partner. His integrity reminded me of Richard, and together we modernized the company without sacrificing the values it had been built upon. Instead of spending every day buried in paperwork, I rediscovered the hobbies I had abandoned years earlier. I converted the guest bedroom into an art studio. I joined a local book club. I hired a landscaping company instead of struggling to maintain the yard alone. Most importantly, I learned that living alone wasn't the same as being lonely. Nathan rented a small apartment across town and accepted a position as a project manager with a respected construction firm. The salary wasn't extraordinary, neither was the apartment, but everything he owned had been earned honestly. Claire eventually moved back to her hometown after their divorce was finalized. Without access to my home, my company, or my savings, she quickly realized that shortcuts rarely lead to lasting success. One afternoon, Walter stopped by my office carrying an old toolbox that Nathan had borrowed years earlier. After handing it to me, he sighed. "I still can't believe how everything unfolded." "Neither can I," he smiled sadly, "but maybe everyone learned something." "I hope so." Before leaving, he looked back. "Thank you for showing mercy." I understood what he meant. I could have spent years fighting Nathan in court. I could have publicly humiliated Claire or cut my son completely out of my life. Instead, I had chosen boundaries over revenge. That decision changed all of us. Today, as I sit on my back porch watching the sun sink below the trees, I think about the woman I was on the night I overheard that conversation outside the guest room. She believed grief had made her weak. She was wrong. Grief had simply hidden the strength that was already there. Nathan comes for dinner every Sunday now. We don't speak 3 times a day like we once did. Instead, we enjoy quiet conversations about his work, my paintings, and the memories of Richard that now bring smiles instead of tears. Trust takes time to rebuild. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but scars remind us that we survived. Looking back, I realize Claire never destroyed my life. She reminded me to protect it. She forced me to remember that kindness should never come at the cost of self-respect, and that love, without healthy boundaries, eventually becomes a weakness others are willing to exploit. My home still stands exactly where Richard and I built our dreams. The company continues to grow. My heart is healed. And every evening, when I lock my front door, I do so with complete peace of mind. Because the strongest foundation in any life isn't built from wealth or property. It's built from truth, dignity, and the courage to protect both. No matter who stands on the other side of the door,